She walked in unnoticed, just a simple woman with an old rifle. But when the first shot shattered the champion's record, the entire range learned never to underestimate quiet strength. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Blue Ridge shooting range was packed that Saturday morning, filled with the usual crowd of enthusiasts and professionals. The air smelled of gunpowder and ambition as competitors prepared for the regional sharpshooting tournament. Men in tactical gear moved with confidence between stations, their expensive equipment gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Near the entrance, several staff members huddled around national champion Derek Winters, a former military sniper who had dominated competitive shooting for the past 5 years. His presence had drawn a larger crowd than usual, and the range buzzed with excitement as he demonstrated his technique to admiring onlookers. "It's all about control," Derek explained, tapping his temple with his index finger. "Mind over matter. You need to become one with your weapon. That's why I've never lost a competition in this state." The small crowd around him nodded appreciatively, hanging on his every word. No one noticed when Margaret Foster walked through the door. Margaret, a 42-year-old high school math teacher, looked entirely out of place. She wore simple jeans, sensible shoes, and a light blue cardigan. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a worn leather case that had seen better days. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, just another middle-aged woman on an ordinary day. She approached the check-in counter where a young attendant barely glanced up from his phone. "Excuse me," Margaret said softly. "I'd like to register for the competition today." The attendant, Jason, looked up with obvious skepticism. "The competition? You mean the regional championship? That's for serious shooters, ma'am." "Yes, I know. I'd like to register, please." Jason exchanged glances with his colleague, both suppressing smiles. "There's a $75 entry fee, non-refundable." "That's fine," Margaret replied, sliding her credit card across the counter. "Your call, lady. Lane assignments are over there." He nodded toward a bulletin board. "Good luck, I guess." Margaret made her way to lane 14, situated at the far end of the range. As she set down her case and began to unpack, several neighboring shooters glanced her way, their expressions ranging from amusement to outright dismissal. To her right, 2 men in matching shooting club jackets didn't bother lowering their voices. "Check it out," the taller one said. "Think she got lost on her way to the knitting circle?" His companion chuckled. $10 says she doesn't even know which end of the gun to hold." Margaret proceeded methodically, seemingly oblivious to their comments. From her weathered case, she removed an old Remington 700 bolt-action rifle. Unlike the gleaming, customized weapons around her, her rifle showed signs of extensive use, well-maintained but far from flashy. Derek Winters had finished his demonstration and was now moving through the lanes, offering tips and signing autographs. When he reached Margaret's station, he paused, watching as she assembled her rifle with practiced movements. "First time at a competition?" he asked, his tone condescending. Margaret looked up. "No." "Well, a word of advice. These events can be pretty intimidating. Don't get discouraged when things don't go your way." He gestured toward her rifle. "That's a pretty basic setup. You might want to consider upgrading if you want to take this seriously." Margaret simply nodded and continued her preparations. Derek shrugged and moved on, already forgetting about the unremarkable woman in lane 14. The range officer's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Competitors to your stations. The qualification round will begin in 5 minutes." The qualification round required each shooter to hit targets at various distances. Only the top 12 would advance to the finals. Derek, as expected, performed flawlessly, hitting the center of each target with machine-like precision. The crowd applauded after each of his shots. When Margaret's turn came, the range grew quiet, not out of respect, but from lack of interest. No one expected anything noteworthy from the unassuming woman who seemed so out of place. Margaret took her position, adjusting her stance slightly. She took a deep breath, closed one eye, and gently squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, and, through the spotting scopes, everyone could see she had hit the bullseye perfectly, dead center. "Lucky shot," someone muttered. Her second shot split the first one. By her third perfect shot, a small crowd had begun to gather behind her lane. The casual dismissal had transformed into curious observation. Derek Winters, who had been chatting with sponsors, noticed the shift in attention and wandered over. Margaret completed her qualification round with a perfect score, matching Derek's performance, but with seemingly less effort. The range had grown eerily quiet. The range officer cleared his throat before announcing over the loudspeaker, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a tie for first place in the qualification round between Derek Winters and Margaret Foster." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Derek's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Must be beginner's luck," he said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. The finals separate the hobbyists from the professionals. The finals were structured as a head-to-head elimination tournament. Margaret advanced through each round methodically, her expression remaining neutral whether she won or lost a point. By contrast, Derek was animated, playing to the crowd and celebrating each successful shot. As fate would have it, Margaret and Derek found themselves facing off in the final round. "Before we begin the championship round," the announcer said, "let's learn a bit more about our surprising finalist. Miss Foster, what's your background in competitive shooting?" Margaret adjusted her glasses. "I was on the Olympic team, 2008, Beijing." A murmur swept through the crowd. "Wait," the announcer stammered. "Are you Margaret Maggie Deadshot Foster, the silver medalist?" She nodded once, uncomfortable with the attention. Derek's confident expression faltered. The man who had been patronizing her all day suddenly realized he was standing next to a legend who had quietly stepped away from the sport at the height of her career. "Why didn't you say anything?" Derek asked. Margaret shrugged. "You didn't ask." The final round began. Derek shot first, a near-perfect score, just slightly off-center. When Margaret stepped up to the firing line, the entire range fell silent. She took her stance, breathed deeply, and fired. Through the spotting scope, everyone could see she had hit the absolute dead center of the target, setting a new range record. The crowd erupted in applause. Camera phones captured the moment as Margaret stood there, looking somewhat embarrassed by the attention. The award ceremony took place in the main hall of the Blue Ridge shooting range, hastily decorated with the venue's championship banners and sponsor logos. The crowd that had gathered was 3 times larger than when the competition began, news having spread quickly through social media about the unexpected upset. Local news cameras had arrived, their bright lights creating dramatic shadows across the trophy table where 3 medals gleamed under the fluorescent lighting. Margaret stood on the first-place podium, looking almost uncomfortable with her position. The gold medal around her neck seemed at odds with her simple appearance. The cardigan, practical ponytail, and the gentle smile of someone who found the attention more amusing than gratifying. To her right, Derek Winters occupied the second-place podium, his expression a complex mixture of professional courtesy and wounded pride. His silver medal caught the light as he shifted his weight, his usual confident stance noticeably subdued. The range owner, Howard Briscoe, a retired competitive shooter himself with a booming voice that needed no microphone, addressed the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed today was nothing short of extraordinary. In my 30 years running this facility, I've never seen shooting precision like what Ms. Foster demonstrated in the final round." He turned toward Margaret with newfound respect. "It's my great honor to present this championship trophy to our unexpected victor, Margaret Foster." Applause erupted throughout the hall, far more enthusiastic than the polite acknowledgement that had greeted Margaret when she first arrived. Many who had dismissed or ignored her earlier now cheered the loudest. perhaps compensating for their initial misjudgment or simply caught up in the underdog narrative that humans instinctively celebrate. As Margaret accepted the trophy, a modest crystal sculpture of a marksman, a reporter from the Denver Sports Network pushed through the crowd. Melissa Chen, known for her tenacity in post-game interviews, thrust her microphone forward. "Ms. Foster, Melissa Chen, DSN Sports. The shooting world is buzzing right now. You disappeared from competitive shooting 15 years ago after taking silver in Beijing. Why the sudden return after all this time? And why choose a regional championship for your comeback?" The question silenced the crowd. Even Derek leaned slightly closer, his curiosity momentarily overriding his disappointment. Everyone had been wondering the same thing, but had been too stunned by the day's events to articulate it. Margaret carefully set the trophy down on the podium and adjusted her glasses, buying herself a moment before responding. When she spoke, her voice was clear but modest, carrying the same steady confidence that had characterized her shooting performance. "I never really left the sport, Ms. Chen. I just stopped competing," Margaret explained, her tone matter of fact. "Shooting has been part of my life since I was 12 years old. My father taught me on our family's property in Wyoming. It was our way of connecting." She paused, her eyes briefly drifting to the worn leather case that contained her rifle, the same rifle her father had given her for her 18th birthday. The crowd remained silent, captivated by this glimpse into the mysterious champion's background. "After the Olympics, I had to make a choice," Margaret continued. "I'd achieved nearly everything I'd set out to accomplish in competitive shooting, but there was something missing, a sense of purpose beyond the medals and records." Chen pressed further, sensing a deeper story. "But you were at your peak. Sports analysts predicted you'd dominate the field for years. What could possibly pull you away from such a promising career?" Margaret's expression softened, and for the first time that day, genuine emotion flickered across her face. "My father passed away 3 months after Beijing. He had been battling cancer throughout my Olympic training, but he never told me. He didn't want to distract me from my goal." She swallowed hard before continuing. "His last wish was that I use my gifts to make a difference in people's lives, not just collect trophies." A respectful hush fell over the audience. Even Derek's expression transformed from curiosity to genuine sympathy. "So I went back to school and got my teaching credential," Margaret explained. "I've been a high school mathematics teacher at East Denver Public for the past 14 years. The precision, the focus, the discipline that shooting taught me, I found I could translate those lessons to the classroom. Helping young people discover their potential became more rewarding than any competition." "But that doesn't explain why you're here today," Chen pressed, though her tone had softened considerably. "Why return to competition after all these years?" Margaret smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "My advanced placement calculus class has been struggling with confidence issues. Brilliant kids, all of them, but they doubt themselves. Constantly. When they discovered my background in competitive shooting, one of them found an old Olympic team photo online. They were fascinated but skeptical. They couldn't reconcile their boring math teacher with an Olympic silver medalist." She laughed softly at the memory. "One particularly difficult student, Tomas, challenged me directly. He said, 'If you're so good, Ms. Foster, why don't you prove it? Enter a real competition with real champions.' The other students joined in, and suddenly we had a wager on our hands." The crowd chuckled, many of them parents who understood the dynamics of teenage challenge and adult response. "What were the stakes of this wager?" Chen asked, clearly intrigued. "If I placed in the top 3 today, every student in my AP class would commit to taking the advanced placement exam next month. Many of them have been too intimidated to register, despite having the ability to excel." Margaret's eyes shone with purpose. "These kids need to understand that it's not natural talent that defines us, but dedication and perseverance. I wanted to show them that even after 15 years, those qualities don't disappear." From the sidelines, Jason, the desk attendant, who had dismissed Margaret earlier, whispered to his colleague, "Man, I feel like such a jerk now." Meanwhile, Derek Winters had been listening intently from his second-place podium. His initial resentment had gradually transformed into something approaching admiration. He stepped down and approached Margaret, extending his hand. "I owe you an apology, Margaret," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I was unprofessional and condescending. I judged you based on appearances rather than giving you the respect every competitor deserves." Margaret accepted his handshake with grace. "It's all right, Derek. Most people see what they expect to see. It's human nature." "Your technique is flawless," Derek continued, genuine professional respect evident in his tone. "The way you control your breathing, your trigger discipline, it's textbook perfect, but with something extra I can't quite define. Would you consider joining the national team again? With your skills, you could easily—" "I'm a teacher now," Margaret interrupted gently but firmly. "This wasn't about returning to competitive shooting. This was about showing my students that challenges are meant to be faced, not avoided. That excellence doesn't have an expiration date." Chen, still recording, couldn't resist asking, "Will we see you at the state championships next month? Your performance today would easily qualify you." Margaret shook her head. "Today was a one-time event to fulfill a promise to my students. Tomorrow I go back to being Ms. Foster, who assigns too much homework and expects precise answers on calculus exams." Her eyes twinkled with humor. "Though I suspect my students might pay a bit more attention in class now." After the ceremony concluded, Margaret found herself surrounded by fellow competitors who had ignored her earlier. They peppered her with questions about her technique, her training regimen, her experiences at the Olympics. She answered politely, but briefly, gradually, working her way toward the exit. As she gathered her belongings, Howard Briscoe approached with an envelope. "The prize money," he explained. $5,000. You earned it." Margaret accepted the envelope with a nod of thanks. "This will go directly to the East Denver Math Team Fund. We've been trying to raise money for new calculators and competition. Travel expenses." Howard smiled. "Would you consider hosting a masterclass here sometime? Many of our members would benefit from your expertise, myself included." Margaret considered the request. "Perhaps during summer break. Send me the details and we'll see what can be arranged." As she made her final preparations to leave, Derek approached once more, this time without cameras or audience. "One last question, if you don't mind," he said, his tone revealing genuine curiosity. "That rifle of yours, it's at least 20 years old. No custom modifications, basic scope, standard ammunition. Yet you outshot competitors with equipment worth 10 times as much. How?" Margaret ran her hand along the worn stock of her Remington, her expression thoughtful. "My father used to say that a true marksman could hit a target with any rifle. It's not about having the most expensive equipment or the latest technology. It's about understanding the fundamentals so deeply that they become second nature." She secured the rifle in its case with practiced movements. "In shooting, as in teaching, as in life, mastery comes from understanding the basics and applying them consistently, not from shortcuts or accessories." Derek nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom. "You know," he said, "I could learn a thing or two from you." Margaret smiled. "Everyone can learn something new, Mr. Winters. That's what I tell my students every day." She glanced at her watch. "Speaking of which, I have tests to grade tonight. Those calculus problems won't score themselves." She shouldered her rifle case and picked up her trophy. "It was nice meeting you, Derek. Perhaps our paths will cross again someday." "I'd like that," he replied sincerely. Margaret made her way through the now quiet range, nodding goodbye to the staff as she passed. The automatic doors slid open, and she stepped out into the late afternoon sunshine, just as unassumingly as she had entered hours earlier. But this time, everyone watched her go with newfound respect and perhaps a touch of wonder, understanding that greatness often hides in plain sight, teaching high school mathematics and inspiring the next generation to aim higher than they believe possible. As her modest sedan pulled away from the Blue Ridge shooting range, Margaret smiled to herself, imagining the expressions on her students' faces when she walked into class on Monday morning. They would learn an important lesson, one that couldn't be found in any textbook, about challenging assumptions, about quiet excellence, and about fulfilling one's potential without seeking validation or applause. And that, Margaret thought, as she drove toward home, was a lesson worth coming out of retirement for.